different ways. You can buy a model, you can buy a kit and build it. You can do what is known as kit bashing, which is you modify the kit, you lower it, you do whatever, you add detail, or you can do scratch building.
Okay.
So I am more into the kit bashing, scratch building side. I don't buy anymore.
Okay.
And they all comes from childhood because my dad never used to buy me toys. The family of 6, 5 older sisters and me. And none of us, we brought up in, what should I say, very decorous, I wouldn't say poverty. We always had enough. So I never had any toys. So the choice was you made your own toys. So you could take cardboard and that and this. And we didn't have TV and that is, we would be bored, sick of life during summer holidays. You just, nobody cared about you. Nobody bothered about sending you. There were no summer camps, swimming camps. Nothing was structured in our lives. We just hung around doing nothing. Or so we thought. So we did a lot of stuff with our hands. And then once you pick up all that at childhood, when you join a job, you shouldn't lose it. So somehow in the very, exacting circumstances of work, I still managed to find time to remain in touch with my hobby.
This is Aditi Raja and T.R. Raghunandan's home in Bangalore. It also houses enough collectibles, antiques, and items of special interest to be able to call it a mini museum as well. T.R. Raghunandan was formerly an official with the Indian Administrative Services. Now, a large portion of his free time is spent in restoring his antique cars, writing books, and making models from scratch. Today, we take a deep dive into one of Raghunandan's labors of love, one that exudes romance, nostalgia, ingenuity, and progress: the locomotive engine.
This is a model of the B-class locomotive used in the Darjeeling Himalayan Railway, one of India's most loved locomotives. The Darjeeling Himalayan Railway has been inscribed as a World Heritage Site now, and these locomotives still run. They are still used, though largely for heritage tours. Now, this was my first model. This was done entirely by hand, and this is what drew me into this satisfying hobby of making models with paper. This is made in elephant dung paper. I spent 300 rupees for making this model because there was every single thing on this was recycled. And this was done in Delhi as a demonstration to children as to how they can make models of high quality and high detail with very little investment. Here too there are many parts that work. For example, the sandbox here opens. Similarly, there's a toolbox over here that opens. This is actually a pen cap. The chimney was made out of a pen cap. The funny thing about this locomotive is that it used to derail because it used to run only on 4 wheels. For such a long locomotive, it has only 4 wheels. And when it derailed, you could actually use this. This is a wooden piece, and you could actually leverage the locomotive back onto the tracks using these. And I modeled all that. Also, the tools. This is a little hook that is used to clean the ash from the ash grate. But this entire thing was built by hand. So this was a great learning experience. I like this model. It's showing its age a bit now, but I still like it. It's quite a nice, pretty little thing. This locomotive, YG3565, brings back very fond memories for me. Back in 1990, I was posted in Hassan, and at that time, the meter gauge lines from Mysore to Arsikare were still running. But steam was on its countdown out. Mysore was being converted to broad gauge, and we were told that by 1991 March, all meter gauge operations on the Arsikare line also would be stopped because Arsikare would be converted to broad gauge. So I once went, I think it was December 1990, I went to Mysore to see if I could photograph any YG and YP locomotives. These are very smart locomotives. The YP locomotives and the YG locomotives were American designs, but they were manufactured by a number of manufacturers, ranging from Mitsubishi to Henkel, which is a German company. Mitsubishi, of course, is a Japanese company. They were manufactured by companies in the Czech Republic, and eventually they were manufactured also by Telco. These used to run between Mysore and Bangalore. The YPs pulled the crack steam expresses like the Tipu Express and the Chamundi Express, and the YGs were used for freight traffic. So I went to Mysore in 1990, December, and discovered that just a few days before, the roundhouse at Mysore had been demolished, and most of the steam locomotives had been carted away. So I was desperate to see steam locomotives. I went to the Mysore workshop. There is a Mysore railway workshop which was built during the Maharaja's times. The Mysore State Railway. This is the shirt of the Mysore State Railway that I'm wearing. So the Mysore State Railway workshops uh, had a YG locomotive. It was this locomotive, YG 3565. The locomotive was wheezing, it was on its last legs, and it was used for shunting. So I went into the yard, the shunting yard, and began to photograph it. And the crew was also close to retirement. There was a very nice Anglo-Indian gentleman. He was the driver of the locomotive. He saw me photographing the locomotive, and then he said, "Hey, why don't you climb up on the locomotive?" So I got into the cab, and then he allowed me to drive it. He actually told me what to yank, what to turn, and very soon I was handling the throttle, of course, very carefully, and I was helping them to shunt the carriages inside the yard. I dare say it's 30 years now, but that was one of the happiest days of my life. And I took just a couple of photographs because cameras and film were in short supply those days. So I just have a couple of photographs of that magical day. And also on the same day, I went to the workshop where, by an amazing coincidence, they were actually, by a sad coincidence actually, they were throwing out documentation relating to steam locomotives because they were phasing out steam locomotives. And I was able to get some absolutely unique documentation of the railways, including the maintenance manuals for these locomotives with line drawings of these locomotives. In fact, that is the closest I've come to getting a blueprint of this locomotive. And later on, I heard that YG 3565, the very same locomotive that I modeled, had been scrapped. It was never preserved. And the staff retired soon thereafter. I mean, I felt very sad for the staff because, unlike other locomotives, with steam locomotives, every one had its different characteristics. And typically, a driver with a steam locomotive would be assigned to the locomotive for life. And when a locomotive is scrapped, they would be heartbroken. And this locomotive was scrapped, the staff retired, and that was it. So this model is actually a homage to that unforgettable day that I spent in the Mysore workshops. And this is the only locomotive that I had actually driven. It is in 1/16th scale, and the material that I have used to manufacture this model is a lot of recycled material. It goes from paper made out of elephant dung to shampoo bottle caps, shampoo bottles, recycled plastic, pen caps, pen refills, and so on. The model is accurate to the last degree in the sense that every single rivet, nut, and bolt that is on the original, including the underbody detail, which is rarely shown in models, is captured here. This model is a display model, it doesn't work, but it tells you very precisely every single fitment that was put onto this locomotive. There is, I would dare say, there is no deviation from the original. There are no drawings for this locomotive. I searched high and low for the drawings. Sadly, the Indian Railways actually destroys and throws out old drawings. So I had to make the drawings myself, and that involved a lot of research. I dare say I would have spent about a year's time on research. I visited museums where these locomotives were kept, as also the Rewadi shed. and I was able to clamber inside the locomotive, underneath the locomotive, and take very detailed photographs and measurements, which I then used to dimension out the locomotive and convert it into 1/16 scale drawings. So, doing the research and doing the drawings are very important if you are into scratch building to such a high degree of accuracy. The model has taken me 7 years, 9 months, and 11 days to complete. Of course, I was not spending all my spare time on it, but even so, it has taken me more than 3,000 hours. I have taken more than about 2,000 photographs of the originals, and I have recorded and documented the entire process of construction of this model, of scratch building this model. Fundamentally, what you do with modeling is that your enthusiasm tends to be very high in the beginning, and that is a time when you must do the boring and repetitive bits first. So I made the wheels, I made the springs, of which there are multiples. I mean, I had to make 20 wheels, I had to make similarly 20 sets of springs. So you start with the repetitive bits, and then you begin to assemble them into sub assemblies. Typically you start from below and you work upwards and outwards. So there are phases. You complete the chassis, you super detail the chassis, which is that you apply every single nut and bolt on the chassis, because once you put the body on the chassis, then you cannot work on the chassis any longer. And then you build sub-assemblies of the boiler, the cab, the tender, and so on and so forth. And eventually you put the sub-assemblies together. And then there is something called super detailing, which is to get every single detail right, which is the plumbing, the cable, the levers that run the engine, and so on and so forth. Now, for people who look at mechanical devices today, I think that the locomotive is one of the most perfect mechanical devices ever built. The steam locomotive, particularly in the last days of its evolution. You would not believe it, but this locomotive does not have a single chip or a single electronic device to run it. In fact, it has just one bit of, one of its, shall I say, activities, or its devices is run by electricity. Otherwise, every single thing on this locomotive is driven either by steam or by simple mechanical principles of levers, of fulcrums, and of leverage. That's how the entire locomotive runs. The only place where electricity is used is where steam is used to generate electricity from a turbine, and that runs the lighting. And I think the only other device that is of a similar nature, of being run entirely mechanically, is a winding up watch, or a large old clock like a grandfather's clock. But in terms of complexity, I think the steam locomotive would rank amongst the most complex of mechanical devices. And that is something that we must remember and we must celebrate, because sadly in India, the memory of steam locomotives has died out 20 years back. And with the passing away and with the moving on of the old repositories of wisdom, the old drivers and the old mechanical engineers who tended to steam engines, we are losing a huge chunk of our industrial heritage knowledge. It's very sad, but a lot of modern engineers do not know how a steam locomotive used to work. I am not a mechanical engineer, but working on this model, even though it's not a working model, I have learned every single minute aspect of how each and every action on this locomotive is performed. Right from how the steam is generated, to how the steam is used to pump water into the boiler, how steam is used to apply the brakes, how steam is used to create a vacuum, and then all the mechanical ways in which the motion or the pressure of the steam is converted into mechanical motion and conveyed to the wheels. Also, how various controls are operated by hand, which go from increasing the throttle, to applying the brakes, to releasing sand for greater friction so that the wheels do not slip on the track. all these ways and means by which a locomotive functions, I have learnt because I built the model to a very, very high level of detail. I would say to a 100% accurate detail. I chose 116 scale because it is a good scale at which to work. At this scale, you can capture a lot of detail. In fact, if you do not capture the detail at this scale, I don't think you're doing a good job and realizing the potential of modeling. At the same time, it's compact. It's not very large. This model is 4 feet long, but I can show to people uh, what exactly is on this model. Steam locomotives have a way of describing their running gear in terms of the number of wheels that are used for various purposes. So these are known as the pilot wheels right in front. It's held in a separate cradle. In my model, the cradle moves. Uh, so these are the pilot wheels. They are small, as you can see. And these are the driving wheels. You can see one, two, three, four of these driving wheels. These are the large wheels, which are all linked together. You can see these linking cross, rods, and these wheels are the ones that actually drive the locomotive. And then behind the locomotive, you have what are known as a trailing wheels. They are held in what is known as a trailing wheel cradle. It is right behind. It is right here. So here in the YG locomotive, it is called a 282 configuration, 282 locomotive, because it has two pilot wheels, eight driving wheels, and two trailing wheels. So the trailing wheels and the driving and the pilot wheels ensure stability. The pilot wheels actually guide the locomotive into a curve at fast speed, and the driving wheels transfer the pressure of the steam into the rotary motion of the wheels. Now, how do the driving wheels work? You can see this is a cylinder, and the cylinder has two parts to it. There is a cylinder below, and there is a longer cylinder at the top, which is used for operating the valves. Because as the valves move to and fro, the piston inside the cylinder moves to and fro. So there is an arrangement here. All these rods are part of that arrangement. It is called the Walschaerts movement. So what happens here is that the piston which is inside the cylinder uh, is connected to a crosshair, and the crosshair is connected by the crank to the main driving wheel, and the main driving wheel is connected to the other three wheels. So as the piston moves back and forth here, the crank moves the main driving wheels round and round and round. And because the main driving wheel moves around, it is connected to the other three driving wheels and they move. So this main driving wheel, if you notice on a YG, is interesting as compared to the other driving wheels, because if you see, the other driving wheels have a flange. They have a flange which ensures that the train does not slip from the tracks. But the main driving wheel doesn't have a flange. It doesn't matter that the main driving wheel doesn't have a flange, because all the other wheels have a flange. So the locomotive will not slip away from the rails because the main driving wheel does not have a flange. Now, if you notice here, the other driving wheels just have a connecting crank which connects to the main driving wheel, but the main driving wheel has a counter crank. This counter crank and this arrangement of rods moves the valve in the opposite direction of the piston. So if the piston is moving in this direction, the valve is moving in the opposite direction, because it is by this reciprocating movement of the piston and the valves that the valves are opened to ensure that the steam exits the piston and it enters the piston, so that the piston moves. So this entire arrangement is called the Walschaerts valve movement, and this entire arrangement is what makes the locomotive move. The other thing that you can see on this model, which you can see right behind, there are a lot of details that are hidden from view, but they are there, are the leaf springs, the suspension that 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 kind of cushions the movement of the wheel. Of course, unlike on a road, the track has to be fairly level, so there are no sharp bumps, there are no speed breakers on a track. But even so, a train does undergo some kind of bumpiness. So the springs, very simple leaf springs, cushion the uh, wheels as they move over the track and makes the ride comfortable. You will see here also there are some controlling rods. You will see one set of rods over here, and there is a set of levers that converts this movement. They are operated from within the cab. For example, this set of levers, which you can see here, it operates what is known as a sandbox. This is the sandbox, and you cannot see it. You can just barely make out behind here. The sandbox has a tube that comes onto the track, and what happens is that when the sandbox lever is open, a little bit of sand drops onto the track, and so the first driving wheel can grip the track. Otherwise, there is something called wheel slip. Now, wheel slip is something that can happen when a locomotive is parked on a slope, and it takes a very skilled driver to ensure that there is no wheel slip on hill sections. Also, when a train takes off, when it starts from a platform, a little bit of sand is dropped onto the track, so that there is a little friction that is caused when the wheel bites into the sand, and the train can move forward. Otherwise, you have steel running on steel, and that causes wheel slip. Unlike on a road where you have rubber hitting the road, locomotives don't use rubber. The other thing that you can see here in detail are the brakes. These are the brake shoes, and the entire linkage of the brake is suspended in between the chassis, which you can see when I show you from underneath. So a lot of the details of how these things work are can be seen underneath. Now, if you can look here, these are the rather complicated plumbing. You will see a lot of pipes emerging from here. This is what is known as a feed water pump. The feed water pump pumps water from the tender. This is the tender. The coal and the water is carried in this tender, and from the tender, water comes into the feed water pump. But you might ask the question as to how water enters the boiler when the boiler is already under high pressure with steam. What happens is that the steam is conveyed into the pump. You can see this pipe here. This pipe conveys steam into the feed water pump, and the steam at high pressure creates a vacuum, and it pumps water into the boiler here. It goes here. So the steam comes out from here, and it goes into the feed water pump, and it pumps water at high pressure back into the boiler. And every single one of these valves is connected to the inside, and every single connection I have made. Now let me come to the tender. The tender is a fairly simple, uh, stable, uh, construction. It carries coal in the top part, and it carries water. And here on top, you can see I'll show you later on. You can see the water filler, lids. These lids are opened, and in most railway stations, you have what are known as watering stops, where the water flows into they're filled up here. A train has to stop for water quite often. Now, the interesting thing here, and if you can zoom in a bit, you will see rivets. Now, before welding, riveting was the way in which metal plates were held together. And these locomotives did not use as much welding as was possible at that time. They still continued with the traditional method of using rivets to hold the metal together. But the interesting thing here is that if you see, the rivets are very closely spaced. The gap between two rivets is 1.5 millimeters, And this entire tender has something like, I think, about more than 2000 rivets. And if you count the number of rivets on my model, it is exactly the same number as the rivets on the original. Now, this is an exercise in patience. So, what I did was I set myself targets because you could not do more than 200 rivets a day. So, this took me about a week just to punch out each rivet because you get eye strain. Even though I do use magnifying glasses, you get eye strain when you begin to do this. So let me come to the upper body of the locomotive. The, the body comprises of the boiler and the smoke exhaust, and here is a furnace. I thought it was a fairly simple thing to make. The core is made of thermocole, but the moment one began to add detail, it became quite a long drawn out process. This is the, of course, the smoke, the chimney. This is the water inlet valve. The water, as I said, which comes from the feed water pump, goes into the boiler over here. This is the steam dome, and it is from here, from within the steam dome, that steam is collected. But the interesting thing is that the steam is not directly fed into the cylinders. The steam, which I have not shown, which is internal, which is a mechanical thing that I have not shown inside, but the steam drawn from the steam dome again traverses into the furnace and it becomes superheated. Superheating of steam ensures that a lot of energy is captured in the steam, and then it goes and it is fed into the cylinders. This is the steam turbine. You can see a pipe from here. This pipe comes from a rather complex system inside, and when that is switched on, the turbine begins to function, and you will see a black wire over here. That is to model the electricals. That wire goes into the gangway grab rail, and from the grab rail it exits out in the front to power the headlights. So this is, as I said, the only electrical, uh, shall I say, activity happening on this locomotive. As I said, everything else is run mechanically, but this is the only thing that is electrically operated, the lights. Now this grab rail here, I made out of discarded wire. See it, but there is a grab rail bracket right below here, partially obscured by the grab rail itself. But the grab rail brackets were made from an old coat hanger. They were aluminum, they are made out of aluminum. I painted them, and they were made out of an old coat hanger. This is the gangway itself. If you can see, the cross hatching on the gangway was modeled by sticking mosquito mesh on top of the gangway and pressing down paper on it. So you can see that it is cross hatched. This is known as this is to a steam deflect smoke deflector. It's something like it creates an aerodynamic effect by which the smoke goes straight up when it's in motion, and it doesn't come down, because if the smoke comes down, if the wind blows downwards and the smoke comes down, then it can blow back into the cab, which is not a good thing for the drivers. So these smoke deflectors are required to ensure that the smoke exits straight up. These locomotives look very pretty from the front because of the smoke deflectors. Now, if you come to the cab, I made these shutters movable, both in the front and on the tender. It can be moved. The boiler is covered with an insulated cladding. So the boiler is actually double layered, and the cladding is held in place by these brackets, which I've modeled in detail. These are the safety valves. There are three safety valves on top of the cladding. This is a complex piece of equipment. This is called the oil cooler. There is a pressure lubrication system by which oil is conveyed to all the friction points. But again, the pressure is created to pump the oil through steam. It is not done electrically or mechanically. There's no oil pump, but it's actually a steam impelled pressure lubrication system. I'll show you the pressure lubrication system inside. But the inlet pipe for the steam and the outlet pipes for the lubricant to flow into various parts of the locomotive have all been modeled, both on this side of the locomotive and on the other side of the locomotive. And because the oil tends to get quite hot, this is an oil cooler which is meant to cool the oil before it is sent to the various friction points. This is again a very complex piece. It took me almost a week to make it. This is a steam manifold which conveys a little bit of the steam to various operations, such as the oil pump, such as the feed water pump, and also to operate the whistle. The whistle that you hear and which you always think about a steam locomotive's whistle is operated from the steam manifold which is on top. Now, it's very difficult for you to actually photograph this because when you stand on the ground you cannot see this. So for me, I was lucky that I got access to the Rivadi steam shed, where many of these parts, that is the turbine, the valves, and the steam manifold, were dismantled and they were pieces kept in the workshop. So I was able to photograph and dimension them while on the ground instead of having to clamber on top of the locomotive, which was not possible actually. Even if you stand on the gangway, you cannot photograph these parts. These are the lids for the water tank, and they are opened and water is filled in every few hours on a locomotive like this. As you proceed further, you can see the place where the coal is stored. This is where the coal is kept, and there's a little window over here which can be opened to pick up to shovel the coal and put it into the cab. This is the cab, of course, the cab roof. I've made the cab roof had a opening, a kind of a sunroof to allow some ventilation in dry times. So I have made the sunroof. Uh, but what I have done is, in order to show you the interior of the cab, I have made the cab roof removable. You can see the cab roof can be removed here. That is in the cab has been captured here. The cab took me a long time to make, almost about 2 months of continuous work to make the cab. Now, these are valves that are operated by typical, valve cocks. There are about two, three, five of them here, and these operate the manifold and thereby convey steam into various parts like the feed water pump and so on and so forth. This is the pressure lubricant pump over here. It actually has glass windows which you can see with a magnifying glass, through which you can watch whether lubricant levels are right. This arm, this big arm here, is the throttle. This is what operates through the furnace and the boiler. There's a rod that operates the steam under the steam dome. So by increasing or decreasing the steam inflow into the cylinders, you can increase or decrease the speed of the locomotive. Right below here, right here, is the door of the furnace. You can open the door of the furnace. There is a handle that can move up and down here, and that is where coal is put into the furnace. Right here, you can see the brake, the vacuum brake operations. The brakes are also operated by steam. The movement of steam creates a vacuum in a cylinder which is underneath the locomotive, and that is operated from here. So there are additional steam pipes that come out from the other side of the locomotive, from the off side of the locomotive, and they enter the cab and they connect up with the vacuum brake device. You see this wheel here with a handle? That is the equivalent of the reverse gear of the locomotive. When that wheel is turned, when that wheel is turned, either in the clockwise or anti-clockwise direction, it moves a rod, a reversing rod, which is just a simple rod that is connected here. The reversing rod lifts a particular lever up and down, and by lifting the lever up and down here, the reversing rod conveys the steam to the cylinders in a different way, and the wheels go into reverse. The entire thing is mechanical, nothing electrical here. It is entirely done by the movement of this wheel. And the interesting thing here is nothing more than human power is used for this. There is no power steering, there are no power brakes on this. Every single device has to be operated by hand, and this wheel has to be turned in order to ensure that the valve sequencing is changed through a complex system of levers, thereby conveying the steam at a different sequence into the cylinder. So that entire system has been modeled. Now let me come to the gauges in a locomotive. There are three gauges in a locomotive. There is a steam pressure gauge over here, and there is a vacuum pressure gauge here with two needles, and this is the speedometer. The speedometer has the logo of the Indian Railways in the center, and if you, with a magnifying glass, you can read the numbers and you can make out the likenesses of the logo. You can make out the likeness of the logo. I copied the pattern of this from an original locomotive in Calcutta. As far as the steam gauge and the vacuum gauges are concerned, these were copied from locomotives in Rewari. Without the help of the staff of Rewari, I would never have seen them, because on many of the displays in museums in India, these gauges are missing. But because the locomotives in Rewari still run, they are fitted with these gauges, and I had the opportunity of photographing them. So the cab, to my mind, was the most complex part of the locomotive, and also the most satisfying for me to make. There's just one more part of the cab that I would like to show. You can see right here, hidden behind the throttle, there are these two glass tubes. These glass tubes are for looking at the level of water in the boiler. When water goes into the boiler, the same level is seen here. It's that simple a device. But when you see the level of water coming down, then you can operate the feed water pump. The feed water pumps are operated through these levers over here, right here. So when this lever is turned, then underneath the locomotive, steam is conveyed into the feed water pump, and the feed water pump uses steam at high pressure to pump water into the boiler. This, a steam locomotive is a mechanical engineering degree. If you can understand the steam locomotive and how it functions, and if you can build a working model, of course, I think you should be given an honorary degree in mechanical engineering. This is as good an education on mechanical engineering as anything else. I would imagine that this is the prettiest aspect of a locomotive, looking at a locomotive head on. And as you can see, the YG locomotive is a very handsome locomotive because it has these steam deflectors, the smoke deflectors. It has these smoke deflectors. Now I detailed the headlight. As you can see, the headlight wire is also modeled. The number of bars in the headlight grill matched the number in the original locomotive. I made them uh, out of paper pins. But the headlight cap is made from a shampoo bottle, two shampoo bottles actually. I cut them, shampoo bottle caps. I cut them and stuck them together. One is for the outer shell and the other one is for the inside. Uh, the This is the cover of the smoke box. This is removed for maintenance, and the inside of the smoke box is periodically cleaned of ash. And these are the handles, which are again made from. I made them from. Uh, what should I say? Aluminum rivets. I had to hand make them from aluminum rivets. This is the buffer of the locomotive and the hook that connects the locomotive to any other carriage in front. As you can see, the buffer hook works, and that is a vacuum pipe that connects up the brakes of the locomotive all along the length of the locomotive. Now here you can see the lamp. This lamp took me quite a lot of time to make. The lamp's cap is actually mildly convex because again I carefully cut it out of the plastic of of a shampoo bottle, of a small shampoo bottle, and I got the curvature just right. I used a lot of little wire to very narrow diameter wire to make the handles on these lamp shades, lamp body. This is what is known as a cow catcher. Now, if you cannot make this out of cardboard because it becomes very delicate, so inside the cow catcher, I have put aluminum reinforcing, and that's why it's a little stiff. These are, of course, the steps for anybody to climb up onto the gangway up here. Yeah, if you look at the nuts here and the bolts here, I had these made in cardboard through laser cutting to get the exact hexagonal shape, and I fitted them exactly as how they were fitted in the locomotive. That is, the nuts are threaded onto studs. These details take a long time to make, but they are worth it because the front of the locomotive is a place that everybody looks at. While everything is made of cardboard, it does tend to get a little heavy. So that is the underneath of the locomotive. If you can look at the underneath of the locomotive, you will notice that the right at the top you can see uh, the pilot cradle, and right at the rear you will see the at the bottom you will see the trailing cradle. All the levers in between are the brake levers. In the center out here at the bottom, this is the chute for the ash to come out. This is the trailing wheel cradle, this one. These are the brake fittings, and this is the pilot wheel cradle over here. Over here. And the tender, the underneath of the tender was the most, actually the most difficult to do. That's the underneath of the tender. Uh, you can see here, these are the brake linkages, and they are operated by these vacuum cylinders over here. There are two vacuum cylinders over here, and when the brakes are operated in the locomotive, a vacuum pipe connects to these two cylinders, and that operates a complex system of levers. These are the levers, and it operates the brakes. The brakes are on the inside of every wheel, and these are the bogies of the locomotive. There are 8 wheels in 2 sets of bogies. Now this was very difficult to do because there's very little clearance under the locomotive to crawl underneath. So it took me quite a lot of time to photograph it to even understand how the whole system worked. You can also see the pumps, the valves from where the water goes to the front over here, and the water flows from these valves to the feed water pump right in front, which I think is quite unique. The other thing is that you now have an opportunity of seeing uh, the inside of the cab. Lid over here can be opened. This lid can be opened. So these latches were made by from copper. Here too, this can be opened. You can open the opening that goes to the back of the tender from where coal can be conveyed. This is normally kept open on a locomotive.